Hey guys, Cloud here. Merry Christmas! I hope you are all having a lovely holiday. At long last, I have a leveling guide for my Exploding Stampede Titan build. There's a lot here that's generally applicable to leveling any kind of warrior as well. Throughout the guide, I'll aim to not only point you in the right direction for how you should progress your character, but also try to explain my rationale for each choice so that you can make your own informed decisions. On that note, let's recap how the explosion interaction works and how our build uses it to play, starting with our main clear skill attack, Stampede. We use Stampede because it's a surprisingly powerful attack with a movement component. We get to move forward while attacking, get a very large slam at the end, and to top it all off, we get a backward shockwave through the skill's jagged ground explosion mechanic, which is great at clearing out stragglers behind us. The movement component is essential, because if we're attacking while moving, that means enemy hits are missing us because we're spacing ourselves out of their reach. And we slot Armour Explosion into our Stampede to expand our own reach. Our Stampede hits enemies, sometimes at the edge of its radius, and then those enemies explode, creating their own AOE effects, which expand the total coverage of your destruction. Now, how did those enemies explode in the first place? Armour Explosion triggers an explosion effect when the supported skill breaks armor on a target. In order for our Stampede to break armor, we use the Shattering Blow passive notable, which breaks 50% of armor on heavy stun. This works on normal and magic targets since those monsters receive 3 and 2 times multiplied incoming armor break. So, as long as we can heavy stun our targets, their armor will break and they will trigger an Armour Explosion. An important thing to understand is that your ability to achieve heavy stuns, and thus Armour Explosions, is going to be contingent on your outgoing damage and stun capability. If you have a bad weapon, you are going to have a hard time stunning things and getting your explosions, which will mean that the build will feel bad to play, if it even works. Taking Crushing Impacts as your first Ascendancy notable can help with this, as it makes it easier to achieve 2-hit stuns. But your ideal goal should be stunning in 1 hit for the smoothest play. And that means you're going to need a strong weapon and investment into stun on the passive tree. We're going to go over gearing, gemming, and passive tree progression for the leveling process. First, let's go over gear. Your armor and accessories are simple enough. Prioritize resistances to dramatically reduce the elemental and chaos damage you take, then life to improve your general hit pool, and then armor to provide some physical mitigation. Armor is generally your lowest priority because not only is it limited to mitigating physical damage, but in PoE, it is less effective the larger the incoming hit. This is why the tooltip for armor says estimated physical damage reduction. Very large hits, such as slams from bosses, will be mitigated to a much smaller degree. So unless you're building a character which can stack extreme amounts of armor, you unfortunately aren't getting that much value out of it in moderation. That doesn't mean armor is useless, however. It's still great at mitigating hits from swarms of trash mobs, which is very relevant since warrior abilities have a noticeable windup. Elemental resistance, on the other hand, is essential. You want to get your resistances to the 75% baseline cap as soon as possible, since by endgame incoming damage will expect you to have that much. And in fact, more in the case of elemental weakness curse maps, which impose another 15% penalty. Remember, if you only have 50% of a resistance, you are taking twice the damage relative to if you had 75% resistance. Chaos resistance is also important, but much rarer and more difficult to acquire. You want to ideally cap it, but for the leveling process, just take what you can get where you can. One notably important stat is movement speed on boots, which is your highest priority for that slot. Not only does movement speed make you faster, which obviously saves you time, but being faster means you can more easily manually dodge attacks and mechanics through movement. Beyond that though, for us, movement speed is doubly important because it speeds up the movement portion of Stampede. In other words, movement speed is a form of attack speed for Stampede. By the way, this is why Thrill Steal is so great for our build. Onslaught provides both 20% skill use speed, which speeds up our windup, and also another 10% movement speed, which speeds up the movement part. Now, for a weapon, you want to aim for a two-handed mace with the highest physical damage you can get, We need to maximize our single hit damage to aim for single hit stuns, and physical damage is important because it yields 50% more stun than other damage types. Attack speed is nice to have, but not really so important because our number one priority is getting our heavy stuns. So after damage, increased stun buildup is going to be the most important affix, especially while leveling. Increased stun duration is another nice to have, as it might make the difference between being able to get off a key attack during a rare stun phase where you have more damage bonuses, instead of missing it. In terms of acquiring gear, during leveling you may find yourself in droughts where nothing good is dropped for you. And this can especially hurt when you're behind on your weapon. This is why I'd suggest saving most of your currency in gold to focus on rolling upgrades for your weapon when you fall behind. Foremost, keep a solid reserve of gold available in case you find a nice weapon on the equipment vendor. Vendor inventories restock every level, so check back to see if there are upgrades for sale. After that, since transmutation and augmentation orbs are quite plentiful, don't be afraid to use some to roll some 2-hand mace bases, appropriate for your level as you go. You can also gamble for weapons with your gold, but I personally never had much luck there. You need to not only gamble the stats you want, but on a good base as well. I think gambling is more forgiving for your other slots where the base isn't as relevant, and especially for jewelry, since jewelry can be quite rare to find. But if you exhaust your other avenues and are still behind on your weapon, I'd try to gamble for one. Next, let's look at our skill and support gem progressions as we level. Armour Explosion is a tier 2 support gem, which doesn't drop until area level 35, around the start of Act 3. And Stampede isn't available until level 41. So, we'll need a clear skill to use in the meantime. That skill is Boneshatter. You need to first prime your target for stun with an opener, after which you can Boneshatter it, producing a heavily damaging shockwave. You can obtain Boneshatter as soon as you get to town for the first time, from your first uncut skill gem. The best opener early on is actually your default Mace Strike. Simply Mace Strike targets, look for the glowing white orb over their head to indicate they are primed for stun, and then follow up with Boneshatter. At level 22, you get access to Leap Slam, which is probably the best opener for Boneshatter, as it puts you right in the middle of the pack and primes many targets for stun, allowing you to get multiple shotgunning Boneshatters which hit everything within each other's radius. For Mace Strike support gems, prioritize Overpower, Martial Tempo, and then Rage. This will allow you to use Mace Strike to stun and generate Rage to prep for single target combos. For Boneshatter support gems, prioritize Impact Shockwave, Magnified Effect, and Brutality to aim for high damage and clear. For Leap Slam support gems, prioritize Inspiration and Holy Descent to keep the mana cost down and provide some sustain during clear. And at level 41, when you do get Stampede, ideally you want to transition into clearing with just Stampede and Armour Explosion. However, if you don't have enough damage or stun to achieve this, you can continue using Boneshatter with Stampede or Leap Slam as your opener until you do. For Stampede support gems, prioritize Armour Explosion, Magnified Effect, Fire Infusion, and Fire Penetration. We need Fire Infusion on Stampede prior to taking Avatar of Fire, because it will boost both our Explosion and our Stampede. If you're on a 2-link and aren't doing enough damage to stun with Magnified Effect, try using Fire Infusion first instead. Our main single target ability is Perfect Strike, which is simple enough. It's a channeled attack which requires you to time your release with its glowing graphical indicator in exchange for massive damage. You can obtain Perfect Strike at level 14. For Perfect Strike support gems, prioritize Window of Opportunity, Eternal Flame, Primal Armament, and Close Combat. Eternal Flame is a significant practical DPS increase, both because it allows you to spend more time dodging mechanics while the Ignite ticks down, and also because the overall Ignite will be much larger thanks to being snapshot during the heavy stun window with all your bonuses and Infernal Cry empowerment. We always want to Infernal Cry before we Perfect Strike for a major damage boost, and also ideally heavy stun the target first to make use of any damage bonuses to stun targets. Infernal Cry can be obtained at level 6, and prior to obtaining Perfect Strike can be used with Rolling Slam or Earthquake for single target damage. For Infernal Cry support gems, prioritize Premeditation, Enraged Warcry, and then Raging Cry. Premeditation and later Enraged Warcry, when level 3 supports become available, will give your perfect strikes some huge multipliers. Otherwise, default mace strikes will actually carry your early single target, as they do quite respectable damage at no mana cost, and they're fast, allowing you to be agile and dodge roll to avoid nearly all enemy counterattacks. Later at level 52, we acquire Hammer of the Gods, which in combination with Seismic Cry will carry your single target even as far as late mapping. You may not even need to perfect strike. Just stun the target, Seismic Cry, drop the hammer, and collect your loot. For hammer support gems, prioritize Fist of War, Brutality, Heavy Swing, and Aftershock. We aren't going Avatar until deep endgame, so this is where we can slot in all of our strong physical supports. Aside from these attacks, we have some persistent buffs we want to use. Your first pick around level 11 when you first acquire a Spirit Gem should be Herald of Ash. Our endgame build actually doesn't use Herald of Ash, but for the leveling process, it's a great choice. The Overkill Splash will definitely help clean up your clear. Later, when we start Explosive Stampeding, we can drop Herald and use Overwhelming Presence to help our stun, supported by Cannibalism for major life on kill, which will give us our recovery during clear. When we get enough spirit for another buff, run Scavenged Plating for more armor during clear, supported by Persistence for a longer duration. And beyond all that, I highly encourage you to use your extra skill gems on other abilities just to try them out. You might find something you really enjoy. As for the priority in which you should link your skill gems, I would focus on Perfect Strike first, then Stampede, then Hammer of the Gods, because DPS requirements are less demanding for clear than they are for single target. Hammer comes last, just because it does so much damage to begin with that it doesn't need much help early on. Here's a recap of the gems we're using and their support priorities. Now that we know how to gear, and the gems we're going to use, let's take a look at progressing the passive tree as we level. One note before we begin, these trees will show all attribute nodes as strength, but you'll probably need a few as dexterity and intelligence in order to use all your gems. You can respect these nodes to switch between the stats at any time for a small gold fee in town. You're never locked in. So don't worry about making any small mistakes, but do be sure to pick up lots of random gear to vendor to start building up a gold stash. Now, for your first points, invest in the melee damage and stun buildup nodes as you path through the initial warrior passive wheels. We don't want to take AoE here yet because their values alone will have little effect on our initial AoEs, which start rather small. Meanwhile, early damage nodes will yield a noticeable difference in damage, as the fewer increases to damage you have, the greater the effective more multiplier they provide. Your first 10% increased damage grants 10% more damage. Your second provides 9.1%, and so on. We don't want to invest in armor or defensive nodes early on because they make little difference when we don't yet have powerful gear with high armor rolls. One important note for Boneshatter is that it won't work if you hit so hard with your opener that you've already heavy stunned the target. This is usually not an issue early on with solo self-found gear, but if it happens, you may want to divest some points from stun buildup and take more pure damage nodes, or even defensives instead. Now, let's take some strength to help us continue using bigger maces as we level. And let's path down to the two-handed wheel to pick up some more damage and 30% increased AoE on stun. 30% is a sizable amount for 1 point, and the prerequisite of requiring a stun will be fulfilled often during clear thanks to your Boneshatters. If you're ever short on strength and need to use a new weapon, by all means focus on taking your next attribute pathing points over any other nodes. Then immediately beeline for Resolute Technique, so that we never have to worry about missing again. Next, let's divert momentarily for Polished Iron. We aren't taking this for the armor so much as we are for the stun threshold. Getting stunned is very bad for us, since mace abilities have long windups, so we'll need to get enough stun threshold to prevent that. If you ever find yourself getting stunned too much, consider respeccing some points into more stun threshold on the tree. Let's go further down and take more damage with the Crushing Verdict and Lasting Trauma Wheel. Reduced attack speed isn't great, but remember it's only part of the Stampede attack speed equation, since movement speed determines the rate of the movement portion. Also, don't forget that our foremost focus is on achieving one-hit stuns to get our explosions. And since the ailment nodes aren't damage increases, but rather a separate type of modifier, they have a multiplicative effect on our Perfect Strike's Ignite. Continue on to take the damage nodes on the Mace Wheel. At this point, we've front-loaded most of our damage nodes. Now, let's take Shattering Blow and flip the script. With the Quest Reward skill books, we should be just about here by 41, the level we unlock Stampede. Since we're now more interested in maximizing stun buildup to aim for one-hit stuns, go above the Mace Wheel and take Titanic. We also get some nice stun threshold. Likewise, to start accelerating our clear given that we have enough damage and stun, we can start taking more AoE. Go back above the Shattering Blow wheel and take the Impact Area and Impact Force notables. Then, down and across to pick up Cranial Impact. This notable effectively gives our Infernal Cry an extra empowerment when used after a heavy stun, meaning we can either do 2 empowered Perfect Strikes, or after we get Hammer, we can wombo combo Infernal Cry, Seismic Cry, hit with an empowered Perfect Strike, and then drop an empowered Hammer. Continue on to Bulwark. Bulwark disables your ability to iframe basic strikes and projectile attacks, but those are rarely a great threat to us. Ground mechanics and telegraph slams and AoEs are much more threatening, and Bulwark can help reduce our damage taken if we're not able to perfectly roll out of those in time. Next, take Hefty Unit for a sizable flat stun threshold increase. If you're struggling with stuns earlier on, consider taking this node earlier, and if you're not dealing with stuns at all at this point, consider skipping it until later. Then we take Perfect Opportunity, another big damage boost against stunned enemies, especially since higher Perfect Strikes means bigger ignites. And finally, we can take the Authority Wheel at the bottom for some more AoE. At this point, we should be just about finished with Cruel Act 3, and ready to head into mapping. It's now time to start transitioning towards the endgame build, which takes more defensives and also makes use of weapon swap trees to focus on one tree for clear, and another for single target pinnacle bossing. How you transition will depend on your character's gear loadout. For instance, without Giant's Blood for a shield, you aren't going to want the path through the shield nodes, and without Avatar of Fire, you're certainly going to ignore the Fire Wheel. On that note, something I must stress is that Giant's Blood and Avatar of Fire are endgame goals, and by endgame I mean tier 15 mapping in Pinnacle time, not tier 1 startup mapping. Avatar of Fire is intended to maximize our single target Perfect Strike damage and allow our Explosion and Stampede to scale off the same supports. Avatar of Fire actually diminishes the damage of our Hammer of the Gods intrinsically by only converting 75% to fire, and also by eliminating our ability to use physical damage supports on it. Moreover, Avatar also reduces our outgoing stun capability, since physical damage deals 50% more stun. Avatar is an endgame optimization for both clear and single target, and contingent significantly on having a strong enough weapon to support the stun loss. Players who really like Hammer of the Gods may not even want to go that route. And likewise, Giant's Blood is something we would like to have in order to run a shield with our two-hander to improve our survivability. But Giant's Blood triples the attribute requirements of weapons, meaning it requires you to get a significant amount of strength bonuses on your equipment. When you do start looking to use Giant's Blood, I would target strong physical weapons with around a 100 strength requirement. And in fact, my last video illustrates quite clearly that Giant's Blood and shielding is not strictly necessary. Good movement will allow you to avoid most damage during mapping, given that our primary attack is also a movement skill. Also, while we're here, for our build we generally do not want to be dual wielding. During clear, we don't need an offhand weapon, as a lot of our clear damage is from Armour Explosion, which only deals damage based on the main hand weapon. Meanwhile, a shield is invaluable for survivability against swarms of monster hits. And during single target, dual wield provides only a marginal benefit to our Perfect Strike damage, because it actually reduces the individual hit damage. You get 2 Perfect Strike hits at 70% damage, but you can only have 1 ignite, which will likewise be smaller since ignites are based off of your hit damage. So it's much better to have the extra survivability and stats from a shield. The extra stats especially means you can afford to run more uniques, such as Thrill Steel, which will have a greater impact on your gameplay. Finally, let's look at our Ascendancy points. You do not want to take Crushing Blow if you're still using Boneshatter, since Boneshatter is your route to stuns. During this phase, I would simply take Mysterious Lineage for more life as your first Ascendancy notable. Once you have 2 notables available, take Hulking Form. It's incredibly powerful and makes you stronger in every way. However, if you've transitioned to Exploding Stampede and are struggling to achieve explosions, Crushing Impacts can help you get heavy stuns in 2 hits. With 3 notables available, I would take Hulking Form and Mysterious Lineage, since the Aftershocks are only for slams and not our Perfect Strike, and since we likely don't have a shield yet, the extra survivability is great to have. With all 4 available, you can choose between Earthbreaker's Aftershocks or drop Lineage and take both Earthbreaker and Ancestral Empowerment for bigger stampedes, but again that has no effect on your Perfect Strikes. My recommendation is to keep using Lineage and add on Earthbreaker, or maybe even Stone Skin if you have a high armor chest piece. Well, I hope that covers everything you could need to at least get to mapping. For more insight on the endgame build, I'd recommend watching my recent AOEMAXXING update. Oh, and I almost forgot about quest rewards. There are 2 quests completable in both normal and cruel mode, which allow you to select from a set of permanent bonuses to your character. The Act 2 Clan Relics quest can be changed at any point in the future, so you don't have to worry about them too much. However, the Act 3 Venom Vial quest currently cannot be changed, so make sure you're certain about your choice for it. For the Act 2 Clan Relics, you should pick Increased Charm Charges Gained in Normal, and Life Recovery from Flasks in Cruel. For the Act 3 Venom Vial, pick 30% Increased Elemental Ailment Threshold in Normal, because we have a hard time getting that stat as warriors. The Act 3 Venom Vial in Cruel is a more difficult choice. Chaos Resistance is a necessity, so picking it will make gearing easier, but Reduced Slowing Potency is even harder to get and also quite valuable. I picked Chaos Resistance, but would probably pick Reduced Slowing Potency if given the choice again. Well, I think that just about does it. I hope this guide was useful to you. Links to sample progression builds as well as the full endgame build with Avatar of Fire, Giant's Blood, and 6 links are in the description below. Also, feel free to drop by my Twitch with any questions. I'm streaming as much as I can these days. One topic on my immediate to-do list to cover is a basics guide on weapon swap passive trees and how we make use of them as a budget dual spec, so keep an eye out for that. Until next time, Exiles.